Welcome to another episode, everyone. Let's watch as this white man pisses off his own people by exposing their extremely barbaric and dark history. And other folks of that nature are pissing off these people by exposing their hypocrisy and their history. Let's get right into it. I didn't say it, they did.
They attack black people after they've been murdered, when they did absolutely nothing wrong. You're pushing us to the limit. And what do I mean by that? You're asking us to talk about history, the history of the South. This is in Georgia. What happened in Georgia? There were savages in Georgia. It was the ancestors of the white right-wingers. They were absolute savages. They murdered people, they lynched people, they raped people, they enslaved people. They took babies from their mothers and sold them as property. You want to talk about savages? Your ancestors were the biggest savages the world has ever seen. And so don't you dare call a black man a savage after you murdered him. Don't you dare do that. I'm so sick of African Americans being called violent when the world's worst violence was done to them, not by them, to them, not by them.
This white
We do not have a history of killing white people. White people have a history of killing us. See? And what you fear, may I say this, sir? What you fear, and it's a deep guilt thing that white folks suffer. You are afraid that if we ever come to power, we will do to you and your fathers what you and your people have done to us.
Female turns to the black person sitting beside her and says, if you get power, aren't you going to want to do to us what we have done to you? And males say, if women get power, they'll want to do to us what we have done to them. Now, how many of you people of color want to get even with all white folks? How many of you want to get even with one or two? How many of you females want to get even with all males? How many of you want to get even with 6 or 7 of them? How many of you people of color and females want to get equity with white males? Equal treatment under the law. How many want that? Well, see, the whole thing is not about getting even. It is about getting equity. And yes, somebody needs to be in control, but the possession of the proper urinary tract does not make you more qualified to be in control than somebody else.
It just wasn't by perchance that it happened that way. I mean, it was meant for a reason.
It didn't happen that way perchance. About 10,000 years ago, males and females were acting equitably and were treating one another as equals, and then males took over the power because they have physical power and physical strength.
Who gave them that power?
Men took that power. Men took that power by their physical strength, and they maintain it by their physical strength. And if they don't, then you explain to me why we were willing to use tanks against American citizens in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago. Tanks against American citizens.
Well,
that's called the ultimate use and misuse of power.
Europeans come to this continent, literally ethnically cleanse the...
That was Jane Elliott. But, you know, she pretends to be an advocate for the darker peoples of the world, but she's against reparations. Like all, you know, you all will find what I found long ago, that you have no allies. None of these people really support you when you get down to it, when you take their mask off. The Dean Withers of the world, these people don't support you. They just pretend that they do, and they profit off of this pretending. But they don't really care about you, including her.
Indigenous population out of existence. Kill them on a scale that has hardly been equaled and refer to them as savages. That's an achievement. Who's the savage? The first time I encountered this was in a little town in Massachusetts called Deerfield. It's a reconstruction of what that little town looked like in colonial America. And in front of each house is a plaque that explains something about this house. And then description. On the 18th of October of 1702, the savages attacked. The first time I saw this, the savages. You come in here, destroy everything these people have, and they are the savages. That's an interesting move.
It is.
You know?
I hadn't thought of that before.
Think about it.
Let me say that again. The whole history of America.
You haven't thought of that before. That's because you want to be blind to the facts. How could you not have thought about that before? Unless you just don't care. You don't want to recognize your own history. This all I think about is how these, as I've said before, I will never allow these people to convince me that I am a criminal, a thug, a gang member. I'm no good. I am the scum of the earth. I'm lazy. I'm this, that, and the other. I am violent and aggressive. You know, these things that they put upon my people, that the black man is violent and aggressive in nature, so is the black woman, etc. When they have committed the worst violence known to man, when they commit crimes, the most heinous crimes, crimes against humanity throughout their entire history, the most sickening crimes you can ever think of. People like to sanitize slavery, but do you know really the atrocities that took place during slavery? I'm going to get into some of it. Why not? I'm going to do that. I think people don't really get it. These people are savages. They are some sick individuals. And throughout their history, they've been sick. And throughout their history, they put their sickness on someone else. It's like when the police pull you over and beat you up and put in the police report that you were resisting arrest or that you assaulted them. This is what they do. The things that they do and that they always put upon the victim. They come in and kill you, enslave you, and grape you, and say that you are a thug, that you have a murderous nature. The people who have committed the most sickening crimes in the world are accusing you of being criminal and aggressive by nature. You turn around and believe this nonsense. It's all propaganda.
Is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count. That's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the North was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly, right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs, and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Well, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like, how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life, because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I gotta charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer, telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric, telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took them, right? That's the argument. Keep in mind, there's been a net outflow of Mexican folk from this country, out of this country in the last 10 years. Right now, border crossings and actual in-migration at the lowest level they've been since the 1970s. So anybody who believes that is a damn fool, or somebody who does not understand how to do research on the internet, or someone who doesn't care, right? But he says the reason you don't have a job is those brown folks took them.
They'll try to tell you it was everyone, that every civilization did bad things, that human nature is violent, that we're all the same. No, We are not all the same. Because it was never everyone else. It was never the Yoruba who crossed oceans to enslave millions. It was never the Lakota who planted flags on somebody else's sacred land and called it a new world. It was never the Khmer Empire that wrote entire legal systems around skin tone. It was never the Mongols who erased libraries and called it order. It was never the Mexica who cut down entire rainforests for fashion and profit. It was never the Aboriginal people of Australia who declared other races subhuman by scientific law. It was never the Inca who dug into mountains and called it wealth while poisoning the sky. It was never anyone else who turned healing herbs into billion-dollar pharma. Never everyone else who made gender a property tax code. Never everyone else who exported the nuclear family like scripture. It wasn't everyone else who made whiteness a god, blackness a sentence, and everyone else a servant. That was a specific invention, and specific people built it. It was never everyone else who carved borders into bleeding land and called it peace. Never everyone else who renamed your God, your language, your bones, then sold it back to you in textbooks. It was never everyone else who erased the world, then gaslit it. The Swahili coast didn't invent extractive capitalism. The Hawaiians didn't manufacture generational trauma and call it civilization. The Diné didn't colonize the moon or bottle water just to sell it back. The Tamil kingdoms didn't translate astrology into racial eugenics. The Zapatistas didn't force everyone into debt so they could feel divine. This idea that everyone did it, that colonization was just a phase, is the last defense mechanism of a dying empire, because if they can convince you that everyone is guilty, no one has to answer. But memory is too sharp now. The algorithm is awake. The archive is breathing. It was never everyone else. It was them. And the rest of the world? We're not guilty. We're just remembering. We remember what they erased. They always knew what they were doing. Cope.
Hey, good morning. Here's a moment in white history. Have you ever wondered how we found out the proper amount of vitamins, nutrients, minerals, or calories we needed to consume in a day in order to survive? You can thank Dr. Lionel Bradley Pett, who found out exactly what it took to keep the human body alive by starving native children to death. The experiments were performed by the Department of Indian Affairs of Canada under the direction of two physicians. One, Dr. Percy Moore, the Indian Affairs Branch Superintendent of Medical Services, and Dr. Frederick Tisdale, a famed nutritionist and former president of the Canadian Pediatric Society. The First Nations nutrition experiments, as they were called, were a series of experiments run in Canada by the Department of Pensions and National Health, now known as Health Canada, in the 1940s and 50s. At the lowest estimates, these experiments were conducted on at least 1,300 indigenous people, with at least 1,000 of them being children. In these experiments, parents were not informed, nor was their consent given. In the 1940s, Canadian officials became aware that Native children in these residential schools were malnourished. So the Canadian government sent researchers to figure out why these Indigenous children were malnourished. Meanwhile, this evil bastard wanted to know what the recommended intake for different vitamins and minerals should be. He saw the hunger and malnutrition at residential schools as an opportunity to figure out just what the human body needed to survive. So in 1947, he began conducting experiments on about 1,000 children in 6 residential schools across the country. Instead of giving these innocent children food to treat their malnutrition, he gave them supplements like riboflavin and thiamine to see if it would mitigate these problems. It did not. In another experiment, instead of giving these innocent children food to eat, he gave them pieces of enriched bread, thinking that that would improve their malnutrition. It did not. They became anemic and they died. Even though indigenous children were dying, they still continued these experiments. Most of these innocent children were so malnourished that their teeth would fall out, but they wouldn't take them to a dentist because they wanted to see the effects of malnutrition on gum health. Over 1,000 indigenous children were starved to death in these residential schools, and the experiments kept going. Why? because they were already marginalized and vulnerable. Nobody was looking out for the best interest of these children. They had no voice and no one to advocate for their best interest. It's because of the starvation and deaths of innocent indigenous children that we now know exactly how many calories, vitamins, nutrients, and minerals the human body needs to stay alive. And that's how the deaths of indigenous children became today's moment in white history.
Wow. Okay. There you have it, people. Let me know what you think in the comments. Some of them were calling out these horrific institutions. But again, some of these people, they're not allies. They're hypocrites. And, there are many things like this. You know, they injected black men with syphilis to see how long it would take them to die from the disease. The government did this. It's the list of the atrocities in this country are infinite and unparalleled around the world. The sickest crimes known to man have transpired right here in this country. Bottom line. I don't know how much I can get into, but I'm gonna get into some of it. It is what it is. I'm gonna take my chances, but I'm gonna have to expose this and expose these people. They're not gonna like the content, I'm sure, but they never do because the truth hurts. But my people need to know what's going on, and I'm gonna let them know. But there you have it. We know who the real savages are. They've displayed it throughout their entire history. Their savagery. It's unmatched. But they'll put it on you. They kill you and then call you a killer. Who's the killer? You just killed me. Well, you the killer. They kill you and then call you a killer. I mean, this is wild. This is nasty work. That's the happenings of this country. But let me know what you all think in the comments. Some of them called it out. Look at them starving the indigenous children in school. Kids can't even go to school and learn something. This man is starving children on purpose to see how much vitamins the body needs. They're experimenting on human beings. They've been doing this throughout their history. They will experiment on your body, on your dead body. Savages. Sick individuals. Bottom line, stay safe and stay free, people.